We're an exciting industry, but we do important work. We feed people. I think our industry has never been more important, yet never been more taken for granted than it has been in the last little while. And that is both a challenge and an opportunity for us. We're a solution to some of the big challenges of life.
Welcome to Unplucked, the official podcast of the Poultry Science Association. This is the podcast where we strip away the fluff and get real about poultry science from bench to barn. I'm your host, Andy Vance, Executive Director of the Poultry Science Association. In this week's episode, we're going to talk about how we build public trust in animal agriculture. It's a big challenge, a complex topic. We want to think about what's next for animal welfare and how we communicate that in a noisy digital world. We're joined this week by Kim McConnell, founder of AdFarm and a trailblazer in agri-food marketing. Fresh from a keynote address at the 2025 Animal Health Canada Forum, Kim will share with us some insights on collaboration, communication, and what the next 15 years could look like for animal health and welfare in Canada, North America, and around the globe. I would say, as a point of personal privilege, I was really excited that we got Kim on this episode because after working in agribusiness media for a lot of years, I really look up to some of the titans in the marketing, PR, communication space. Hard to find one who's been more successful at building a lasting business from the ground up than Kim. Also, somebody who's given back tremendously in his local community, a number of personal and professional honors, including being named a member of the Order of Canada. Kim, let's start with the big picture. You've spent decades at this kind of nexus between agriculture as an industry and communications as a profession. In your keynote, you look back over what you described as 15 years of collaborative evolution. From your perspective, what are the most striking changes you've seen in the animal health, animal welfare ecosystem during that period?
Well, first, Andy, thanks for inviting me to join you today. It's wonderful. Our industry is continually evolving. We're an exciting industry, but we do important work. We feed people, and we're a solution to some of the big challenges of life, being the planetary challenges, etc. So we got a pretty important mission, and I think that's something that we maybe don't often pause and reflect enough about, of how important our industry is to our communities, to our countries, and to the world at large. And it's dynamic and it's continually changing. And that's also another thing that makes it bloody exciting. And every day is not the same and where it goes forward. So I think it's dynamic. We're seeing so many new technologies that continue to come on. We see new ways of communicating that continue to come on. We see challenges that are thrown at us on different areas. So we're a dynamic industry in that regard. I think our industry has never been more important, yet never been more taken for granted than it has been in the last little while. And that is both a challenge and an opportunity for us. Building trust with the consumer is really, really important. They need to trust what they eat. And in general terms, I think they certainly do in the Western world. But they also want to know more and more about how our business is growing, or how their food is growing. How do we go about doing that? That's a big change in the past. And I think it's going to continue to be a change in the future. And of course, how we communicate what we're doing is continually changing. And that's an area where I think our industry has to pick it up a pace.
I love that dichotomy you described there. I think that's maybe as succinct and appropriate a description as I've ever heard. That this idea that we're taken for granted, maybe never more important. And it feels very true for those of us who've been around it for a long time. You've advised a lot of companies over the years on marketing and brand building in agriculture in particular. As we think about some of the observations you made there, and I'm really interested in the trust aspect specifically, how would you advise the industry to think about this role that trust and building our brand and communicating has played in the evolution you described there over the last 15 years as this has all evolved?
Well, you can't buy trust.
Mm.
You have to earn trust. And you earn trust by living how you actually are operating. And I think transparency has never been more important than it is right now. To be transparent on how we're doing. With a cell phone in your hand, there's not much you can hide anymore.
Mhm.
So you better be pretty transparent. You better be pretty clean, and you better communicate it in a way so that it can resonate in the best possible way for you. Because if it isn't, you're going to be found guilty in the court of public opinion, and that's not a good one to be in. So I think the opportunity is challenging in that regard, and we have to make sure we're doing it right. But that's how you build trust, is you earn it. And we have an industry that's worthy of earning about, because we do the right things. We're committed. Look at the producers. Yes, sure, they're in it for a living, but more so than any, we know the importance of sustainability. We know the importance of keeping things from one generation to the other. And I think that's a message we need to convey a little bit more and take a little bit more time talking about that than just implying that it may be.
Yeah, I think that's so true. We're trying to make a living, but there's probably less stressful ways to put 3 square meals on the table for your kids, particularly with some of the challenges we deal with in food animal production. I mentioned your keynote at the recent forum. One of the ideas at that event that was featured pretty prominently was this idea of collaboration. For you, what does that mean generally, and how has collaboration shifted in the way industry, academia, government, the producer, the public all interact in this context of animal health and animal welfare?
Well, let me begin, Andy, by saying that the old African adage of if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together, I think has never been more important than it is right now. Collaboration is one plus one must equal more than one, and it can equal more than one. One plus one, how can we make it equal three? And we do that through collaboration. So I think there's many ways of collaborating. I think there's many players in collaborating, and it starts in a lot of ways by let's making sure we all understand what we're trying to do and what we're trying to achieve. What's the mission? What's the purpose? What are we trying to get? And then how can we each figure out what can we contribute to that so that we can be stronger together? I think it also involves having some good leadership. Leadership that inspires, leadership that encourages, and a leadership that moves the ship forward. We got to have momentum in moving things forward. Nobody wants to be involved in something that's boring as heck, that is sitting there and say, well, that's what we did last year. Come on. We want to be involved in moving things forward. And when we start doing that, then that can build excitement and more people want to get involved. And that's, I think, what we're having to do more than ever. I'm going to add one other part. We can't just think in silos. In Canada, we spell agri-food kind of funny. We spell it AGRI hyphen FOOD. Now, I would swear that we maybe don't necessarily have an agri-food industry. We often have an agricultural industry and we have a food industry. But this hyphen is often a mountain. How one side talks to the other side is maybe clashes every once in a while. Now, the consumer wants an agri-food industry. They want to know more about their food. And this mountain called a hyphen has to come down, and we need to build a bridge. And I think that's agriculture and the consumer, but I think it's also within our own industry. We need to learn that we need to collaborate on the big things. That doesn't mean you give up and you collapse on the things that are, no, you bring together. And 1 plus 1 can equal 3 when we do that, and then we can move forward.
I never really thought about that because we don't tend to, south of the border in the States, we don't tend to describe the agriculture industry, the food industry that way with that hyphen that you described. But I've always noticed that when dealing with Canadian partners and traveling in the country, and have spoken at a lot of those conferences over the years during my days at Feed Stuff. Your hyphen analogy, that mountain, the silos that creates, I had been thinking about gaps in communication. I'm wondering, we have all of these different, I don't want to say factions, but stakeholder groups. You have the producer and the consumer, the regulator and the industry, the science and the public perception of science and agriculture. For you as a professional who's observed this growth over the years and seen these gaps or these silos, where do you see the biggest gaps or challenges in between these different groups, or maybe all trying to get to the same place but come from very different perspectives?
Well, I think the gap between our industry and consumers is actually growing further apart. In North America, in particular, as we look at this, the number of people that are directly involved in agriculture or who have a background in agriculture, every year we seem to get smaller, but our cousins haven't been on the farm for a while. So that's sort of grown apart. So we have to make sure that we start telling that story and bringing them together a little bit more. And I think the awareness of our industry and the sophistication and the excellence in our industry, we need to be starting to tell that story a little bit stronger today and in the more. We have a good story to tell. It's fun telling positive stories. So we got to get going at that. So that would be my first one, Andy. If I look at regulators in the industry, we got to start being on the same team here
Mm.
a little bit more. And regulators in many areas are too slow, and there's too many different levels. You have the federal level, you have provincial state levels, you also have municipal levels. And regulations are impacted in all of those different areas. And in many cases, we're going too slow. But we're not trying to lower standards by any means. But by golly, we got to be able to move forward here a little bit quicker in that. And if we don't, then we don't necessarily get access to the situation. And so that's challenging us. I think we need to work as regulators and industry maybe a little bit closer together. We need to understand that, come on, let's get on with things and let's make sure that we come to a win-win together in that. We're not on two different sides here. Let's come together with that. If we look at science and the general public, that's becoming harder and harder all the time too. Science is becoming a little bit harder every day, and we need some education a little bit stronger in that regard. I think industry plays a role, but we also have to make science exciting, and we need to make our industry exciting. But there are gaps. Let's recognizing that there's gaps, but let's also work together to bridge those gaps.
One of the things I've been thinking about, you were talking about those gaps and the need to tell our story, particularly when we're talking about producers and consumers. I was reflecting, 25 years ago, starting as a cub farm reporter on a little radio station, we've been encouraging producers for mostly my entire career to tell their story and communicate with consumers. And yet I agree with you wholeheartedly, Kim. It feels like the gap has never been wider than it is now. You gave some pretty good reasons as to why that is. I'm also wondering about the rapid pace of change in media, if that has fueled some of that. Social, digital. My wife and daughter and I were watching some television shows where it listed the person's occupation and the number of people whose occupation was listed as influencer, and I said, does that just mean they don't have a job, but they have an Instagram account? So the change of pace in media, is that fueling some of that gap that we described? And if so, how do we in agriculture and animal health, animal welfare adapt our messaging to stay current and relevant in that landscape?
I would agree with you, Andy. The pace is considerably quicker than it has in the past, but so is the competition. In the old days, we used to get our communication from a newspaper or whatever, or then from the radio. Well, now you get communication from everywhere. The sources, everybody's an expert. It's a whole bunch harder in a lot of ways than it's ever been. With that in mind, I always remind myself that Mark Twain had some pretty good message for us when he said, I apologize for writing a long letter, but I didn't have time to write a short one.
Yes.
If there's ever a time to get your message succinct and clear, it's now. And it takes time. You need to think about what are we going to say and how do we say it? If a picture's worth 1,000 words, well, I think it's maybe today worth 10,000 words. It's never been more important than using photos and little video clips and different things. By the same token, it's never been easier. We can do that because we got our cell phones with us with cameras, so we can capture all that. We can do different things in that regard to be able to move things forward with that. But we also need to recognize that the platforms that we're doing, I may communicate in one way with my kids. I do a different thing with my grandkids. I
Mhm.
do a different thing with different audiences and where you are. And we need to be relevant and be aware of that. But by the same token, Andy, I also have a lot of confidence in this. I think our producers and industry people know how to use these tools better. I think they feel more confident about using these tools. And I think they need a little encouragement every once in a while to be able to stand up and spread this a little bit more than they have. And some of the old buggers like myself need to be able to be a coach in how do we do this rather than sitting on the backside and criticizing or saying nothing whatsoever. So I think that there's a role for mentorship as well in this whole communication area.
And the recognition, as you said, communicating with different groups, with different channels or in different ways, also important when we're talking about the international audience for agriculture. And I've seen that as I've traveled the globe, different regions of the world will use different platforms and tools, and that becomes even more challenging, but opportunities as well to reach people where they are.
I'm going to maybe add one other thing.
Yeah.
We are an industry that is very quick to be able to quote the facts or quote the statement or quote the whatever else it is. We need to be a little bit more focused on what is the benefit and how can we convey the benefit in terms that resonate. And that takes a little bit of thought before we actually go forward and do it. And tell a bloody story. People love stories. They could tell me the story about how this came or how to go. Don't just tell me the fact that it contains X number and it costs this much, it does this. Tell me the story of the benefit.
Nobody ever cried over a pie chart, but they sure have over a story. Well, I don't know. Maybe if I was in the wrong boardroom, maybe I'd cry over a pie chart, but for the wrong reasons. Yeah, I love that. I mean, such great advice. So let's start fleshing this out a little bit as to how we get practical with some of this. We were talking about collaboration a little bit earlier, and I think most of us agree that's how we have to move forward. Your use of the proverb there about if you want to go far, go together is really powerful. But collaboration's hard. So I'm wondering, in your experience, some of the practical observations you might share with us when you've been trying to connect diverse stakeholder groups, let's say, in our context, they're veterinarians, producers, policymakers, marketers, around some of these more challenging issues in the animal food production space.
I would think that one of the best examples that I know of, and I played a very small role in a lot of ways, maybe an initial role, but the one I'm specifically recalling is the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. It's now become the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. But this was an initiative where the entire industry got around the same table, virtual and collective. I will give McDonald's credit for champion and making that happen in Canada to get it going. When I look and say, why do I think this is a good example? First off, we got everybody around the table. We recognized that we had a common goal, a common purpose to be able to move forward in. We had a champion who stepped up and said, let's get around the table and let's move things forward. And we had a commitment to be able to come together and do this. And the results have been very, very good. And there's some good lessons in that. But if we look at agriculture as a whole, that was just beef. We are bigger than that. Most consumers don't necessarily look at agriculture and they don't look at the poultry industry and they look at many things like food. This is food. This is meat. This is eggs, whatever. But let's think a little bit broader at times than just our very specific ones. And then how do we come together? So there's some good lessons, I think, in there. I think from another area I would mention, Envy, is that I think we need to just pause a little bit more and think about what's the key message I want to convey? What's that key message? And then say, put ourselves in the shoes of the person that we're trying to convey it to. How do they want to hear it? Where will they hear it? How can we make it succinct so that it resonates in that regard? And sometimes that's a picture. Sometimes that's a video clip. Sometimes that's a speech. But how do we convey that? And how do we convey it in a positive light, even if it's a negative story? We address it with honesty, with commitment, with sincerity, and we push forward because we got a good message to tell.
And as you said earlier, it's fun to tell a positive story, and the industry has such a great one to tell in so many ways. A few minutes ago, you were sharing an example, the Global Roundtable, and how that worked, and a good collaborative effort that then expanded beyond Canada. I'm wondering if you have any other examples of initiatives in Canada that you think modeled that kind of collaborative spirit you just described, or successfully moved the needle in terms of building public trust in the animal health, animal welfare space.
Let me maybe take that from a different perspective. I live in the Calgary area. We have a very unique organization and event in Calgary called the Calgary Stampede. And the Calgary Stampede, there's 3,500 volunteers that make the Calgary Stampede happen. Yes, there's a couple hundred staff as well, but the Calgary Stampede wouldn't operate if it wasn't for volunteers. Now, I am also of the belief, Andy, on leadership. If you don't learn leadership at school, at home, or on the job, at school, in most cases, they don't teach it. And at home and on the job, there's always a boss. Your mom, your dad, you're the CEO, you're whatever else it is. If you really want to learn leadership, you learn it by being a volunteer. And Calgary Stampede is a really unique deal because there's 52 committees that make it up, and they're composed from all different walks, and you're focused on bringing some things together. And it's exciting when that happens. So when I see the model of the Stampede and what it has done for 100 and some years and where it is, I think there's lots of examples, that lots of similarities, that our industry, whether it's the poultry industry, whether it's agriculture in general, could come together and learn from some of these things. But it also has to be fun. If we don't have fun, I don't have enough time to go to anything that is not fun and has a purpose to be able to move forward. So I think those are some lessons we could also learn at times to be able to move things and move things forward in a positive way. I'll come back and say, if we want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. And when you can go together in a meaningful way and have some fun doing it, by golly, she's a pretty nice picture.
Well, I'm always willing to accept Calgary Stampede examples, and I would give a little preview, save the date for members and friends of the Poultry Science Association. We're going to Calgary in July of 2028 for our PSA annual meeting and North American Scientific Conference. So save the dates. We're going to go right after Stampede. So I think it's a great opportunity to make plans, go spend a few days at Stampede and stay on for the PSA meeting in Calgary. That is certainly what the Vance family plans to do in summer of 2028. So, Kim, we'll look forward to seeing you there and spending a few days in one of my favorite cities on the planet. I want to move across an ocean for a minute. Your role as an ambassador for agriculture. I know we're actually getting ready to head to Mongolia to set up an interesting program there. And I'd love to hear more about it because it's an area where I know you have a lot of passion, and one that strikes on, I think, something that'll be a passion point for a lot of us in agriculture, particularly those of us who've been around the industry a while. Share with us what you're working on.
Well, this is, Andy, kind of an interesting little initiative. If I don't know a lot about Mongolia, but I'm going over to find out a bit. But it's my understanding that there's a lot of arable land in general terms. There's a very nomadic way of living, and they follow the herds, etc. And there's also a lot of the technology transfer or information transfer hasn't always been as accepted. There's also less young people that are coming in, and the young people that do, their wives and children are often staying behind. So if there was ever a time for 4-H or 4-H type leadership programs, it's now. So I've been asked if I would go over and look at the scenario, look at what could be done, and be able to maybe come up with a structure that would enhance the technology transfer, but also enhance the opportunities to profile industry, but also for young people, particularly young women and young people, to do. So I think the 4-H model is a very, very good model. It's to learn to do by doing. You not only learn the practice, but you also learn how to convey that in a meeting. You learn how to convey that in public speaking. You learn how to communicate. So I think the 4-H model has a lot that it can contribute to something like this. So as I go over in a couple of weeks to have a look at what they're doing there, I'm going with some background on some programs that have served us in North America pretty darn well over the period of time. I'm not sure our solution will be perfect, but there's some probably lessons that we can learn and we can do that. So I'm really excited about doing this, Andy.
Yeah, I just for those of us who have grown up in this industry or been around it, I think a lot of us have that passion that you described so well for young people and getting them engaged and involved. I'm excited to hear more. I think it likely we will have to have you back on the show in a future episode to talk about what you find as you travel there and how the program gets off the ground.
Well, thank you. I'd welcome that. The 4-H is one component. I think FFA is probably another component because I believe what I'm going to see when I'm over there is there's a kind of programming that is needed for younger people, but there's also a opportunity for the older youth, let's call them, to be able to be the spokespersons and the FAA approach. And then what do we see with some of the other things that can be done with young families? And integrating that and be able to spur on the entrepreneurial spirit. And so I'm really quite excited about this, Andy.
As we wrap up our time together, Kim, I want to drill into some maybe things that are specific to our audience here in the poultry industry, poultry science. If you were speaking specifically to, let's say, producers in the poultry industry or industry researchers, some of the scientists who are listening to our program working in the industry space, what would you ask them to prioritize when it comes to how they communicate or what they communicate with regard to welfare science and thinking about the stakeholder audiences that we engage with? Any advice or recommendations for them as to how they should think about communicating industry and scientific topics?
Well, I think I would maybe start by looking backwards for just a second by saying, why did I want to get into this industry? What does this industry do? Why do I want to be involved in the poultry? Why do I want to be involved in the science and that? And what makes me giggle and say, I'm glad I'm in that industry? Just pause for that for just a second and then say, with that in mind, how would I convey that same interest to get somebody else excited about it? Think about that in poultry and poultry science. Why do you like agriculture? Why do you like poultry? Why do you like the science? Just start with that, and then you will be able to say, now, how do I communicate that even further? And then pause and say, what would be something that's really interesting and exciting that maybe the population doesn't know today?
I see.
What am I doing today that makes me interested in getting up? And how could I convey that? That'd be my second part. And then my third part is how can I say or convey that message in the simplest, easiest way so that resonates the hardest? And that may be a picture, that may be a little video clip, that may be a little short sentence or whatever else it is. How do I convey that going forward? One other thing I might say, Andy, is that I would really encourage the young people to get around the table. And they need to be able to get around the table. And as they go to that meeting, whether it's virtual or whether it's in person, go with two thoughts in mind. Number one, what's the best question I'm going to be able to ask at that table today? And number two, what is the best message that I think I can convey and need to convey it that message? If you go prepared with that, you're going to provide some different things. Young people are often sitting back and saying, gee, I don't know what to say. A young person that asks a great question, all of a sudden, all the old people like me look at you, oh, wow, that was a pretty smart question. And all of a sudden, I'm elevated a whole bunch further. Now, old people like me, our job is to encourage and make sure we get input from all of us around the table. So start with why you wanted to be in the industry. Understand what makes you excited about that. Convey what's something that's new and interesting and something we need to address that's meaningful. How do we convey that in such a way? Make it happen.
You and I are professional communicators, so we may take this for granted, or maybe it just comes natural, or we're used to it. It's second nature. I've observed, and like last year, we hosted a professional development conference and a bunch of scientists in the room. And oddly enough, the most popular session was the media training session. And it dawned on me that a lot of times our scientific colleagues really want to do the things that you just described so eloquently, and they really are willing and interested in telling the story and communicating, but maybe they haven't had the opportunity to get the tools. They've been so focused on becoming brilliant scientists and researchers that they've missed the trainings or classes that you and I have had in how to become good communicators. You gave some great tips there. I'm wondering if you have any additional advice or guidance for, let's say, non-communicators, scientists, extension professionals, producers, about how they can become better communicators on a day-to-day basis, communicating to non-scientific and non-industry audiences.
I would challenge them to say to themselves, we have a really good industry and we have a really good story that needs to be told. Now, what role can I play in telling that? Feel knowledgeable about what you're going to be able to say and stand up and say it. You have pride in your industry. You play an important role. Make it happen.
Last question for you, Kim. I always like to ask guests the what I call the crystal ball question. So if you pull out your crystal ball, look into the future, if you were writing that keynote on the next 15 years now, what do you think are the big topics you'd expect to dominate the storylines of the animal health, animal welfare conversation between now and 2035?
Well, what I would hope it would convey is look at all the positive contributions that the livestock industry is providing to mankind, to our country, to our community. Look at the number of people that we are getting to feed and how we are doing that. Look at the contribution that we are contributing to the economy, but also to the planet. Look what we are doing. And don't just look at our GHGs or whatever else it is or this. Come on, look at the progress that we're making on that. So I would hope that we would focus in a little bit more on that type of thing. And we could back that up by saying, and these are the actions that we have taken in order to be that. We are a success story. And I'm not convinced that we are saying that strong enough and in a way enough that it is communicating and it is resonating with people because they want to be part of the success story. They want to hear the success story. They want to feel confident in the success story. And my hunch is they want to be part of it. And when we start doing that, then we're going to have more people that want to contribute in our industry than ever before.
I can't think of a better way to end our conversation than that. Kim McConnell, founder and former CEO of AdFarm. What a great, inspiring message. I said at the top of the program, I was really excited about this interview, and boy, it did not disappoint in any stretch. Thanks, Kim, for being a part of this conversation, and we'll look forward to having you back again in the future. Friends, I mentioned earlier we're coming to Calgary in 2028. I should also mention we're actually coming to Canada for the PSA annual meeting in North American Scientific Conference. Sooner than that, our 26th edition will be in Toronto, Ontario, coming up this coming July in conjunction with the World's Poultry Congress. We want to make sure you visit poultryscience.org. We have our full slate of symposia available there, so you can start making your plans for what promises to be maybe our best scientific program yet. Abstract submissions will be opening in the coming weeks, so you'll want to be thinking about what science you want to present at our annual meeting. While you're there at poultryscience.org, it is that time of year where you want to renew your membership in the association if you're not currently a member. It is just one of the least expensive things you can do to stay engaged in this community and stay involved. Love for you to join us. You can do that at poultryscience.org. Read about the benefits of membership. If you're already a member, go ahead and renew. Easy to do at poultryscience.org. That's going to do it for this week. This episode was produced by Lindsay Johnston with editing and engineering by Mike Lunt of Parasol. If you haven't done so already, subscribe to Unplucked wherever you get your podcast. Feel free to give us a rating as well. That helps others in the community find the podcast wherever they happen to listen. Until next week, for Unplucked and the Poultry Science Association, I'm Andy Vance.